name is Sovan Shatpathy, and I'm the CTO here at Navy Federal. And in my role, I essentially lead all of the architecture, data, cloud, and the different software delivery teams, right? Which are primarily focused on our member-centric mission. We, Navy Federal, are the world's largest credit union. We continue to grow at a pretty good pace. We have almost 11.7 million members, almost 161 billion in assets and growing. So there's always a lot to do, right? And very quickly before that, I worked at Amtrak, where I was the CTO and had a very similar role. And before that, I spent a lot of many years in California and other locations, essentially working for high tech companies.
That's
So
great.
that's me in detail. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Sovan. Tony, if you don't mind, quick self-intro.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is Tony Ambrozie. I'm the Chief Digital and Information Officer for Baptist Health of South Florida. And I joined about actually 20 months ago, coming fresh into healthcare, focused on mostly driving the digital transformation and obviously having responsibilities for the overall technology and now digital product capabilities here at Baptist. And for those who don't know, Baptist is in South Florida, 12 hospitals, 25,000 folks, serving in 1.5 million patients a year.
Wow, that's quite a size. And Tony, while you had to give us an overview of how the currently organization is structured, meaning do you have fully dispersed teams all over the world, virtual? Just give us a little bit of overview of that.
Sure. So obviously, I joined in the full middle of the pandemic, even before the vaccines were out in October of 2020. So at that time, when there wasn't any option to not be fully virtual, and we started the transformation at all levels, technology, processes, during the pandemic, and therefore fully virtual. And I think we've made great progress in that. So at some point we said, or I said, there's no point, and there's no reason for us not to continue that way and adjust what the things that are needed in person, adjust them as one-offs versus the other way around. So we continue to be fully virtual with the model of being in the office or meeting in the office for those initiatives that like brainstorming or coming with a big solutions together. We met indeed in person. I don't even live in Miami, so I live in Orlando, but it's a short drive. But it seems to be working. If we could do this transformation, I think, and that's a kudos to my team and their evolution.
Super exciting. I can't wait to dive a little bit deeper into some of those strategies. Sovan, what about Navy Federal? With being the world's largest credit union, I would imagine you have quite a structure.
Yeah, I think, John, from a credit union perspective, we do have branches globally, right? They have been there for decades. We have an extensive network also in North America, but like everything else, right, the lines are blurring between the digital and the physical, right? And the financial institutions which will flourish are the ones who know best to manage that transition. In terms of the technology teams, we have critical mass here. I'm based out of Washington, D.C. metro area here in Northern Virginia, which is our headquarters. We have a lot of people also in Pensacola, Florida, which is like our second big campus. Probably the numbers are higher there. I think employees are closer to 9 to 10,000 who work out of the Florida campus. And then we also have technology teams in Winchester in Virginia. Plus, we have hired people, John, over the pandemic all over US. And we have people in California tethered to our West Coast hub, which is in San Diego. So yeah, it cuts across, right?
Great, thank you for that. And I have follow-up questions on that. But first, Tony, you've mentioned obviously the team that really helped you build such an organization to this point in this short period of time. In terms of just share your thoughts on creating that culture that really attracts and retains the top talent, more specifically around what has worked well for you, or maybe conversely, what were some of the lessons learned through some of the talent acquisition strategies that may have, could have worked better through this period. Curious to get some of those thoughts from you.
Sure, and one thing that Sovan mentioned is some of us, or some of the organizations, we've been in some form of hybrid defined by somebody is always somewhere else but the office where everybody else is in, right? Sovan has the teams already. I had teams in my previous life all over the country. So even when we were all in the office, we weren't in the same office. So that the principles still were the same, and that has been for 20 years, maybe more. And obviously with the video, that was much more integral. But we've been doing this for quite a while, and so there are ways to deal with this, and ways to not to forget that there's someone else that is not in the room that needs to be in a telepresence. So a video conference always happens. It's the default, even when you have a room. Anyway, in terms of, back to your question, building teams, I think, and attracting talent and retaining top talent, I think that the singular best way to attract and retain the best talent you can find is to have a compelling organizational vision and mission that people really want to be associated with, right? Yeah, money is important, but somebody like us, we're not going to pay more than Apple and Google, so that's not how we're going to attract our talent. And it's yes, money is important for a lot of people, but the great talent that you do want to have on your team usually is people who are willing to forgo some of the aspect of money to work for a great cause. And I mean, in our case, that's what attracted me here. Is like transforming healthcare through consumer centricity, right? I'm a consumer, I'm a patient. I think there are great opportunities for healthcare. I want to help, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. That's a lot of times when I interview people, they said, "What attracted you here, and why are you going to stay?" And then I said, "This is why. This is the great cause." And now, in order to retain those great people, the culture must be true to the promise, and definitely not a facade for other agendas. So people want to make those sacrifices, or this needs to be a high integrity. And then clearly, then the organization and the leaders must deliver, however hard those things may be. But that's okay, because people that you want to attract, and they come for a cause, they understand, and this something like this is not like a promenade, a walk in the park, and it's going to be easy. They expect that to be hard, but obviously expect things to eventually be successful. And yes, sometimes along the way there are folks that maybe they realize that either didn't want to do this, or they're changing their minds, and there's a change. But I think that's natural. And so if you explain, you as a hiring leader, you explain what the job is and what the mission is clearly. I think those who eventually not gonna want to stay are a few. So I think that's not something to fear of, and be afraid of when hiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Tony. I realize how loaded of a question that is, and you did a great job compartmentalizing so many different strategies into something that's succinct. So I appreciated that. Sovan, you've led global organizations for many years, and obviously been very successful in that. So you've seen and experienced your share of high performing teams, and some teams that you had personally built. Talk to us a little bit more around the characteristics of high performing teams, and what strategies that really helped you or can be leveraged to cultivate and foster such attributes of fully dispersed groups.
Yeah, John, I was reflecting on Tony's comment. I always tell that hybrid has now become quite a word, right? Like many other words, they come with the times. But for someone like me personally, it's been kind of part of my DNA. I've had the advantage of working in West Coast for a long time where people just know when you need to be in office for the moments that matter and when you can work from anywhere, right? It is not like there is a set agenda or a schedule. Everybody just knows how to work. So for me personally, for a second, it's been a little bit of a deja vu, right? But to in terms of where the world is moving now, but to bring it back home to your question, right? One, you asked around high performing team and then how they can thrive. Number two, in a dispersed kind of work culture. So for a minute, reflecting on teams, I was listening intently to Tony's comment. One thing I do agree with is we all have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, we must have our food, shelter, clothing, financial well-being taken care of. But then as you kind of move up the value chain, I think it's very important for teams to be inspired by a mission or a cause or whatever you want to call. Apple was brought up. It is obsessed with putting out world-class products. That obsession makes it a magnificent company, right? You come to Navy Fed, we always are rated very high in brand empathy and stickiness, and there is a drive here in how do we serve the people who serve us, right? The entire Department of Defense and beyond. So my whole point is one main characteristic in my mind is that you lead inspired teams. Give them a cause or a mission or a vision to be inspired. Because inspiration, like I say, is permanent and motivation is temporary. Your next short term bonus. Whereas if you're inspired, you want to see the cause getting done, right? Number two, for teams to be inspired, I think it is important that you empower them and you give them a voice, right? I mean, the team should feel like, irrespective of where I am in the structure distributed, I am being heard, I am being listened. It doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything, but disagree but commit. If the enterprise agreed on a proposal, right? So I think, irrespective of the hierarchy, the team structure, if resources and employees, or for that matter, contractors feel like they're valued, they will stay. The third thing I would say in high performing teams is the managers, the first line of defense, right? As you grow in your career, you have layers and layers of manager. True for my own organization here too. But I always say, if you are frontline, you must take care of your employees. And I should too for my direct reports, they for next. So it's like a daisy chain, right? So if the first general in the command has got his troops inspired, it cascades up, right? So I think we should never like underestimate the role people managers have here in terms of driving the teams forward, right? And last but not the least, intimacy with the business outcomes, right? Ultimately, technology is there to solve a purpose. In Baptist Health, it's about world class medical, right? In our case, it's financial well being. So the closer we get to business in terms of understanding the what, because technology teams are always focused on the how, I think it helps, right? So that's right there are like the themes I would think. Very quickly answering on the distributed side of it, my comment, John, if we focus teams on like outcomes and delivery and ensure that the thought making, the decision making, and all of that is co-opted in, teams will work irrespective of the location, the time zone, and all of that, right? Because everybody is focused on the end outcome. They feel like they're being listened to, and there is a good distribution of work gravitas across all the locations. That's sometimes important. You can't be like San Jose based in California or in Vienna, Virginia, and DC, and every decision is like gravitating to one location. Then you might as well create like an offsite center for low value operations. So it's important that intellectual capital, ideas and all are distributed and then they come together. And then if you tie that back with some of the characteristic I talked about in like inspired teams, it shouldn't matter where you are. We are in a world where any place, anytime, any device, you should be able to get your job done.
Yeah, yeah, that's an incredible breakdown. Thank you for that, Sovan. And there's an opportunity for you to write an actual book about this, some of the specific characteristics of high performing teams.
But so let me add. I know I'm taking you off track, but let me add to this. I think he's absolutely Sovan is absolutely right. First of all, managed by outcomes. And so there, when you do that, instead of, oh, is this person in the office from 8 to 6 or whatever it is the expectation, then it doesn't really matter. So all of a sudden, I'm hearing about all these companies are trying to do all this, deploy all this spyware, trying to figure out how long people are in front of their computer. That's madness. That's just completely wrong. But I totally agree. Focused on the outcomes, and that's a basic leadership premise that virtual or not, it should still be the same.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, seems so simple, but yet oftentimes overlooked in terms of being able to cultivate such environment for teams to be successful, which leads me to a further point, Tony. Talking about virtual leadership teams, you guys at the top of the command chain within your divisions, within your organizations, and you do have leadership teams that work with you, under you, leading other groups. When it comes to finding that right balance between collaboration and for having all of your leaders within your organization collaborate with each other, but also individual performance space within those groups, where the majority group is not co-located, what are some of the things that you deploy as a leader that really helps you find that right balance in between?
And I think this is what you heard and you're going to hear. I don't know if necessarily virtual is that different. Yeah. Yes, you have clearly for large operations, nothing can be accomplished individually. So we need to have those processes to come together to have a joint mission or a sense of a joint mission and purpose. And that started with the leader, but it's infused with their leadership team and below. And that's the kind of the framework where everybody is working together. Now, of course, there are those elements that individual contributors or even individual leaders have to deliver, but it's in the larger context. So we meet, and this is true for brainstorming or for solutioning or even just talking. We meet together to get the big context, and then maybe people pull back and they do other things, or they work on something and then they bring back into the team, because largely everything that we do is multiple teams, multiple leaders, especially doing a transformation. Especially when you do a transformation, you have to really talk more, discuss more, decide more than just relying on the lower level processes that kind of carry the organization forward when there's not a transformation of change. So all the time, well managed, I would say, and well focused and targeted team meetings and driven, and where you manage the process going forward, and then as you said, people take that individually and execute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Tony, and thank you for sharing that. Sovan, we've briefly touched upon some of the strategies that really help you and your organization attract the top talent, but with so many opportunities out there on the market for all of us, it adds another layer of complexity when it comes to retaining that top talent. Tell us a little bit further about some of the strategies that really help you create that environment of, practical approach to retaining the top talent within your organization.
John, it's a wonderful question. Even my own career is a pretty good example of how tech is a very great leveler where you can, cross verticals and industries. And I'm a firm believer that, I have a 6-year-old son. When he grows up, everything is tech driven. It already is. Either you're working for technology or around technology. It's like by the people, for the people, that kind of thing. So if you do not know tech or do not know how to leverage tech to drive outcomes for your customer, members, employees, you're out of luck. Tesla is a software company first, in my mind, less of a car company. There's a reason their market valuation is $1 trillion or more, whatever, right? So now to answer your question, I also think, so talent war is real, John, right? So I was kind of doing a setup for my answer. However, I also think we are in people business. At the end of the day, irrespective of what you do, we are a bunch of people working with each other. So I personally feel we are in people business, We are in relationship business, right? And there's a reason I say that. So when you hire these high performing talent, we must, I do that. Everybody is a unique individual, right? They have a story to tell. They have their drivers, they have their motivators, they have good days, they have bad days. So what I have felt, John, which helps in retaining talent, even in a hyper competitive DC metro area, which is getting more and more competitive with the companies coming in, is that treat every individual as unique, build that connection with them where you know their story, not just about job. Sometimes even ask them about their life, what's going on in your life, what's going on with your kids. I mean, what are your hopes and aspirations? Because at that point, you have created a relationship which goes beyond work, right? So now you have a connect. Then you tie it back with the inspiration side, which you talked about, where you inspire based on a broader mission, cause, customer centricity, whatever you want to call it, right? So at that point, and then you couple it with probably interesting work and challenges, right? So at that point, I think, John, you have at least a good chance. It's never a done deal, right? People will move up, they will, migrate and all of that. But at least they will think twice, right? Hey, I have a good manager, I have a good leader, I'm heard here, I'm respected as an individual. I have a relationship aspect which is both personal and professional. We don't have to mix them up. And I get respected for what I do. I think all of us, including me, crave empathy, crave understanding, crave respect, right? And at that point, you will value that. And the deeper you go in the career beyond the first 5, 8 years, these things start to stack up, right? Am I happy here? Am I being heard? Am I able to lend my vision to be executed? So, in that hierarchy of needs, yes, money matters and all of that, but then other things start to crop up, right? So, to summarize, John, I would say that build the relationships, build the personal connection, treat everyone as unique, like our DNA is, and then identify the buttons which motivate and inspire them, right? And then kind of double down on that. And at that point, you did your best, right? And then we go from there.
Yeah, excellent point, Sovan. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So if you're absolutely right. I think, those things are still the same as they've always been. Talking to your folks and knowing them and them knowing you, it's always. I think what's different was different during the pandemic and now more distributed is the bad management or the bad leadership where these things were not done. Now they're a lot more obvious than they were before. They might have missed being not present before, but now it's a lot more obvious. So I think that's probably the only difference between then and now.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Great point there, Tony, as well. And so, Tony, you guys both have been on the Ivy podcast as guests, and I've interviewed close to 400 executives like yourself. And one thing that really comes to mind when we talk about finding the right talent, when in terms of interviewing, companies that are able to consistently attract the top talent have solid practices and procedures established when it comes to interviewing. It's very rare that it's something that's ad hoc. Well, let me just go and just do kind of a walk with a particular candidate. Tony, share your thoughts on the most effective interview strategies that you subscribe to, maybe pre-interview, during, and post, that can help other organizations select better and perhaps move faster in this highly competitive market?
Sure. I'm not sure that I subscribe to the very strict process, and I'll explain why. I have two major rules, fundamental rules when it comes to hiring, and that is, number one is hire for potential and proven ability to learn and adapt and to be excellent. I would say number one. Number two, I'll put it simply, avoid self-centered jerks. That's one category. There's another one that those are focused on the mission. They come out sometimes maybe very strongly, but those can be redeemed. The first category, they cannot. Now, a lot of folks say, well, let's hire for a fit for culture. And I think, it's a very tricky thing, however well-intentioned that may be, because at one end, it will lead to reinforcing the past culture, whatever that is, especially in a transformation, as, oh, let's make sure that they fit with whoever it's already here, but that here needs to change as well. On the other hand, it could be discrimination. Well, we don't like people who are not like us, because us is the right thing. So yeah, so therefore, I think the only rule I would apply is still the first two rules when it comes to fit. As to interviewing, I think the more senior, the more conversations. And first impressions are exactly 50% accurate, that means they're a flip a coin, so they cannot be relied on. And so while yes, the interviews have structures and have a purpose, and it's because you're trying to learn as much as possible about the person, about what they want, and it doesn't have to be very, very strict though, because sometimes somewhat more free conversations lead to either good things being learned or bad things being learned that otherwise a structure would not. And I had times where I was interviewing a candidate, and clearly it wasn't the right fit for the job and the vision. However, the things that came out of the interview immediately prompted me and us to consider for something else that there wasn't even envisioned. So the serendipity of things, it's important. And an open conversation sometimes, in addition to some structure, where the candidate can ask contextual questions versus tell me what you want to, how you want to grow the company in the next 5 years, can show a lot about what they want or they don't want or they fear about this role. So I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, great points, Tony. And I like what you've mentioned in terms of potential to identify those, I guess, the self-centered egos, self-centered jerks. I have a story around that particular comment. A friend of mine who is now an executive at LinkedIn, one of the questions that he was asked during many interviews throughout the process, towards the end, a question was around, what can you do with your eyes closed? And it kind of threw him off for a minute. And when he reflected on that, and him and I were discussing that, it's the hiring manager basically said, well, that question aims to test for some of that self-centeredness. A lot of times the responses you get is, oh, I can do, coding and do all of that kinds of stuff. People tend to go towards that, I guess, not really boasting, but going into the, that self-defense mechanism to justify themselves. But some others, his response was, I can sleep very well with my eyes closed. And I guess that was his his response that really helped him, shed some light on that self-centeredness. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Tony briefly mentioned, when it comes to interviewing executives, the higher you go up the chain, the more conversations you're having. When it comes to those executive team interviews, it's a little bit of a different structure, I suppose. Share your process for interviewing members of your leadership teams. What types of questions do you like to ask? And what do you look for in the responses when you hear them?
I'll go there in a second, but I'm tempted to answer what would be my answer when the eyes are closed. I would have probably said I can dream really well with my eyes closed. And if you don't have dreams, you have no passion. If you have no passion, life is not worth living, to be very honest, So
there you go.
That's kind of my instinctive answer. We must dream. We must be ambitious in a good way. We must be passionate. Otherwise, why show up at work or any other place, But to come to your question, executive panel, I'll probably give the structured answer and then what I look for in it. At least with the Navy Fed or even other places I work, the process normally tends to be that, well, that is the usual HR stuff, just to be sure that, we are in the ballpark and all of that. But normally I would probably be the first filter if the role is rolling up to me, because I want to be sure that in my first interview with like Jahn, let's say, I mean, do I have like that click or that chemistry, right? I mean, it's like I said, see, here's my belief. If just using you as a role play, if your resume is showing up in front of me with 25 years in the industry, you must have done something right. I'm not going to sit here and second guess you on like, okay, does he know this detail in the cloud? He doesn't know. Then I must be smarter than him. That's not my point. So I assume that the resume is more or less correct at face value. You are where you are because of that, right? So I try to kind of filter out in my mind a little bit that, okay, this individual I'm going to talk to, can he work with me? Can he work with my peers, his or her peers, right? And how does he fit into the ecosystem, right? I also look for in the initial screening very much on energy and passion and drive. I personally am big on that. Doesn't mean that you have to scream top of your, you know, you can display passion in many ways for the cause, for what you bring to table, or even just the way you react. And the third thing, pride, pride in your achievements, right? So I'm like, okay, let's see how they kind of reflect on their past, and are they being negative about it, or they're showing everything in the lens of, this is the opportunity statement in front of me and how I did it, right? Beyond that, typically it would move into like an executive panel depending on the roles, right? If you're hiring for vice president level, I would normally want senior vice presidents and all in the panel, right? Once in a while, I also like to put somebody from like my direct team in the panel just to see if that he or she can work with like the 7 or 8 immediate peers. That's a very, very important chemistry right there, right? And the panel interviews tend to be mostly now I have seen in my Cisco days, Amtrak days, Navy Fed, very, very different companies, but all unique and relatively large companies. It's more and more behavioral and situational because at this point you're, as an executive, you're leader of leaders, right? You're leading people who are leading teams, their subordinate are leading teams. So it all comes down to leadership, situational behavior. And I think the answers we look for during those is, how do you take your real world experience and weave it into the answer instead of giving like an abstract answer, right? And then if you kind of go through the process, I would say that I would probably take the top two from a panel and talk again. Because this time I would probably go deeper, maybe 90 minutes, and it's a free flowing conversation, right? Where ask me anything both ways, right? And then depending on the role, I may take it to the senior most exec in the group or a EVP or something, or maybe not, right? So that's how it is, right? Now, for me personally, I think I already hinted at it. I'm always looking for energy, I'm looking for drive, I'm looking for passion, I'm looking for commitment, I'm looking for pride in what you have done. And I think competency shines through, John. If you know it, right? One thing I think happens with all of us over the years is we are like good BS detector over a period of time, right? And I'm always looking for our people going into the detail to give me the answer, or they're like dancing around it in circles, right? So it's important that you know your stuff, right? I'm trying to hire like it's dramatic, like a heart surgeon. I can't let you operate on me on like open heart surgery if you haven't like done it, if you're not like qualified for it. Okay, technology is not life and death, but you should have that kind of mindset. You see what I'm saying? So that's really what it is, and and along the way we find good executives, I think.
Mhm. Right, right, absolutely. I like that. And both of you have mentioned something within the lines of also relying on that very first impression, that initial reaction when you first meet the candidate. I think, Tony, you've mentioned that accounts to almost 50% of that decision-making process. So that makes perfect sense to rely on that. And Sovan, as you were talking about developing and working on that muscle, as you interview more and more throughout the years, you develop that kind of that radar that's able to identify some of those red flags at the very beginning. So that's super
Right.
exciting. I love that space, and we could probably talk about this for the rest of the webinar. But so with only 15 minutes left, just a quick reminder for all of our registrants or guests, you guys can start submitting your questions. And with a few minutes left at the end, I'll start picking those and let Tony and Sovan take some of those. But moving on to Tony, with future of work, according to Deloitte, there was a study recently done that the future of work is being shaped by these two powerful forces: the growing adoption of artificial intelligence in workplace and the expansion of the workforce to include both on and off balance sheet talent. What changes could be in store for the workplace, the workforce, and just the nature of work itself based on the current initiatives in place, perhaps at your organization?
Sure, it's a fascinating topic. I tend to be very positive about AI, ML, things like that in the short term for the high benefits that could bring, especially in, let's say, healthcare, where there's a lot of transformation being needed, a lot of opportunities left and right. I think also that will have some sort of significant impact, but to the workforce, because especially those areas that are, let's say, more ineffective in terms of operations, what folks do, there will be changes in what people do, and whether they're in person or remote. I don't know if necessarily is that important, but there will be impact. Definitely, there are a lot of opportunities, and there are a lot of things that everybody does in terms of automation, in terms of intelligent automation and simplification, and a bunch of things that the machines can do better. Now, the positive thing is that it seems that, at least in this country, in certain industry, we are really short of staff. So whoever's job is transforming in one place, there are opportunities in other places. And I think that's exactly what I'm looking for. And therefore, a lot of the focus is on retraining, rearranging people, and where things are being changed and transformed. I think in the future, and that's already reflected in the current practices, especially for technology, but a lot of other disciplines. Yes, you probably for now need the surgeon in the operating room, but not necessarily forever, because with 5G and remoteness, we've already had remote surgeons from the operating room. But other than that, a lot of folks can be remote, and I think the ability to engage people, either short term or long term, but short term in proper engagements, not otherwise. I think that will open up opportunities for folks that probably have challenge in finding resources in the local area.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Tony. And Sovan, to take that a little bit further, when it comes to innovation and leading the high-performing teams, just to quote the recent Accenture's innovation survey, 60% of companies admitted that they did not learn from the past mistakes in relationship to their approach to corporate innovation. And also 72% of companies polled said that they often missed opportunities to exploit these underdeveloped areas of markets. What is the best approach to allow for mistakes, but leverage these lessons learned towards the improved corporate innovation results?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question and a valid data point, John, right? Long back, I think Clayton Christensen wrote about the innovator's dilemma, right? How the disruptors become disrupted, right? As you kind of grow to a certain size as a company and scale. So couple of comments there, right? I think as an organization, as we grow in scale, we don't want to be disrupted. And if you're not growing, then you're probably on your way out, right? Especially in tech-driven industry. So I think it is important that, Agile is all over in discussion, but one of the principles I spoke about in one of my internal all hands is in an innovative mindset. Innovation is happening everywhere, right? It is not like any single person's agenda. It should be the way we do business. You can innovate even in how you minimize your meeting time so that you're more productive. It's not just about end products and services, but at a philosophical level and a practical level, I would say that we need to be able to build the outcome, build fast, fail small and learn fast. That's what I was driving. And there's a lot in that, right? Which means that, start to build out an idea, build it fast. If you're failing, acknowledge it, fail small, and then from there learn fast and repivot, right? If you think in the greater sense of agile and iterative and show and tell and minimum viable products, minimum marketable products, they all are going back to that basic ethos, right? You're constantly refining, constantly articulating, constantly listening to your end customers so that you're kind of adjusting. Doesn't mean that you're in perpetual like road work, like I hate to say it. I-66 in DC metro area is constantly improving. Okay, I don't know, somebody's making a lot of money out of it. Don't be like I-66, but you get the idea, right? Build fast, learn small, and then from there, go to the next level, right? So I think, and another point I will say about corporate innovation is that it's probably good to some extent being like paranoid. I mean, never get like comfortable in your position, right? Like as a financial services, I can tell for sure that the disintermediation of the financial value chain is real. By that, what I mean is, gone are the days that, oh, this is my bank, my world rotates around bank. Many people use the bank just to park their salary and do Zelle and Venmo. What
Mhm.
about everything else? Oh, TD Ameritrade, Credit Karma, I went to Klarna, I went to Afterpay, I went to Cash Super App. So what is happening is the logical thing that, hey, I am the central main anchor tenant in a mall. That concept is also going away in the banking and financial services sector, which means even we, Navy Federal, who actually has a pretty captive global clientele, must be paranoid in a good way, right? You must think about what's coming around the corner so that you can stay ahead of the competition and continue to provide value to your customers or members, like we call it, right?
Right.
So those are some of my ideas, John, right there.
Great point, Sovan. Thank you for that. And with a few minutes left, I'll take the last question, Tony, for you. And I see a couple of questions within those lines. Um, Tony, small companies and startups can out innovate larger organizations such as Baptist and Navy Federal, not because of what they do, but because of how they think, and also maybe less bureaucracy, less red tape, less procedures, perhaps different factors. What are your thoughts on framing that right state of mind and thought process on your teams that allow for a culture of innovation to cultivate?
So I'm not sure if your question is we're small and we can compete with bigger ones, or there are smaller people who can outcompete us. And I think they're both great questions. I'll address the first one as I remind my teams that in reality they're not competing with all of Google or all of whatever it is, Apple, but that they're competing with smaller teams. If you read about the team behind the first iPhone, it was incredibly small. So it's not hundreds and thousands of people. So it wasn't necessarily the size of the team that drove the quality of the innovation. So, and that's where I started. Like, you can do it, and they can make mistakes. So do we, but we can learn, and they can learn. So that's a big message. The other thing is, you have to with when you for innovation, you have a certain type of people that are open to failure, open to trying, open to figuring out, curious, easy to shift their efforts. So it's a certain type of mindset that needs to be employed. But the moment you have the first small, just as Sovan was saying, small successes, and then you learn, then you have bigger successes. I think the innovation breeds innovation, and a lot of other people want to in the organization want to do it because they see that it works and how it works. Now, I tell people, like, yeah, the sausage is very nice. The end result of innovation is very nice and very cool, but the sausage making is hard when you innovate. Now, the other part where, hey, there is someone out there that is smaller and wanted to come after you. That's not paranoia; it's a fact of life, and that's where we need to stay focused on what we do and what we do very well for customers, consumers, patients, whatever they may be. keeping an eye on those, because those are real. It doesn't mean that any two people in the garage will take over the world. Some do, a lot of them don't, but it's still good to stay focused on your on what you can do very well and better.
Great point. Great points, Tony. Thank you for that. I'll jump to the audience questions for now. Sovan, I'll let you take this one. There's a question from Shane. Is all around upskilling and training the existing employees for high demand jobs. As you know, we've talked a lot about highly competitive markets. So just share some thoughts around that to tap into your existing pool within your organization.
That's a good question, especially if you're a large enterprise organization, you already have like in Navy Fed, we have a big swathe of people who are highly skilled in mainframe. And at the same time, we are going to a lot of like cloud native kind of products and services. So there is a chasm of like 30 years between how the technology has evolved. So what we have been doing, John, actually fundamentally is that to be successful, it's also a cultural transformation, right? You need to bring the village along, because many times what people forget is, yes, technologies are there, but it's at the end of the day, a business process, right? You know how your savings or checkings or I don't know, CD product works within the mainframe setup. That's an invaluable knowledge which is now transferred over to another kind of engine called cloud native. Okay. So one of the things we have been doing is to work with our institutional knowledge base of people and tell them that how the business operates, how the process operates, where the bits and bytes of all the data are going. By the way, now instead of having this, we will be doing it in a completely different way, right? So amp up the fact that they understand the what really, really well, understand the processes really, really well, and from there give some skilled programs depending on the interest of how people want to move up or move around, right? So it's a continual journey, to be very honest, right? And not everybody who did a certain role at a point in time will do the same role in the post-evolved kind of target state, right? So you give the opportunity, but I ultimately bring it back to the fact that technology is important, hands-on skills are important, but probably more important is the business process ultimately you're tackling, automating, digitizing, or making it good for an end customer, right? So we go from that vector, John, right?
Great point, Sovan. So Tony,
Yeah, what I wanted to add something. All true things. And so technology is important, very important. If you're a technologist, you have to absolutely need to know your technology, but also business processes and re-engineering those. There's a skill set and experience how to do that as well. Looking at processes and changing them and transforming that. That's a skill set in itself. One of the things that we've introduced, that I introduced, is the concept, in addition to training and all that stuff, the concept of a training assignment. So in Sovan's example, if you're a mainframe developer and you want to become a Java developer, it's kind of difficult to break into that, because it's just not that one is better than the other. It's just a very different paradigm, and everybody in the Java world, I guess also in the mainframe, they're so busy on churning out those cool apps that it's hard. So while we came up with this assignment, where basically this is about training. We know that when the mainframe developer moves into the other space, they'll have to learn. They're not going to be productive for quite a while, and everybody has to have that expectation. They're not going to be judged by what they deliver, but what they learn over a period of 6 months and how they evolve. They'll do their best. They need to be dedicated to it, but at the end is about learning, not about delivering. So I hope that folks will go there more and more, because that's effective. It's an effective way to shift and uplift skill sets.
excellent points, Tony, and right on time. We're at the top of the hour, and I can't thank you guys enough for your time today. It was very short and insightful conversation. I personally learned quite a bit, and wanted to thank all of our participants and guests, for everyone who joined the conversation and listened in. So I definitely appreciate you guys' time, and looking forward to catching up soon.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you.